Okay, well, as I said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the next edition of our Eunomia's Fit for the Future webinars. Over the last year or so, we've been giving insights into various components of policy that's impacting industry, governments across the globe. Most recently, we did a webinar on the LCA component of EPR in Oregon's EPR legislation. And today we're going to focus very much on SB54, which is at the top of many people's minds, and specifically some of the source reduction components of that. What we're going to present to you today is a little bit of an insight into what is a very large body of work related to the needs assessment that was focused on source reduction that our team with partners have just completed for CalRecycle. So we're going to give you some insights into kind of pathways for meeting the source reduction goals within California. Michael's going to touch on that, and then we're going to give you a little bit of insight in terms of what producers need to be doing now so that they can provide information into that process to enable the pro effectively to develop their program plan. So next slide, please, Michael. So just a little bit of who we are, or who you're going to see on screen today. So I'm Sarah Edwards. I've been overseeing Eunomia's activities in North America for the last 10 years. And I'm here with our packaging lead, Michael Wasserman, who was the lead on the source reduction work that we have done for CalRecycle. So he's going to provide you some of the insights into that. Just on who we are as a company, many of you may know us, but we are an environmental consultancy fairly niche that operates across a number of different geographies, headquartered in the UK. But in addition to our circular economy work, we also do have teams working on a low carbon economy. Much of that work is linked to material use and the impact of material use in the environment, as well as a natural economy team. Next slide, please. So just first of all, obviously a bit of housekeeping. Microphones, I think, will be turned off. Please feel free to keep your camera turned off or on, whatever you may wish to do. And please, can we just direct questions all through the Q&A function. We will try potentially to answer some of those questions as we move forward, but if we don't get to them, we will come back to you with responses as part of a follow-up. So first of all, before we start, we have a short poll just to see and get an understanding of who we've got on the line, so that we can really kind of address some of the content to the needs of the room, so to speak. So I think Joanne in the background is going to pop the poll up, hopefully, for you to just give us an indication of who we've got on the line. Is that working for everyone? Yes, okay, good. Thank you for the reactions. So while you're doing that, I'll just give you a little bit more insight into kind of why I suppose we're here. But Eunomia, in the circular economy space, I suppose in North America, most recently, we've been heavily involved in the progression of extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products, but also for other areas not kind of contained on this slide. But we've worked on a number of the different needs assessments. But as I said at the beginning, California is unique in part because of its scale, but it also required a specific needs assessment for source reduction. So just as an outline for people that don't know or haven't heard the context of needs assessment before, but they're effectively a key component of how the US is rolling out EPR, and they carry out analysis so that you can understand what's currently happening now in respect, obviously in this case, to source reduction. So that's both reuse activities currently taking place in California and other source reduction measures that brands may be putting in place to lightweight their packaging. But then also what needs to be done in this case to meet the 25% source reduction target. So they're really in-depth piece of work looking at infrastructure and services currently, and then the future and how that might change over time. And so this slide obviously just gives you an indication of some of the work that we've done, but also some of the clients that we have. So we really do have a kind of cross value chain perspective on the impact of some of these policies that are coming into play. Next slide, please. And again, this just highlights a little bit about our work. So we've worked in most of the states that have EPR in the US, as well as supporting some of the EPR related work in Canada as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Michael that's going to get into some of the detail related to SB54 and the needs assessment outcomes.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I think we'll have another quick poll in the chat as I get started here. But just to start, I'll be talking a bit about EPR overall, its requirements, and how it kind of differs in some of the source reduction between California and other states. As we know, 7 states in the US have passed EPR for packaging, and we've seen that in the US, there's been this more introduction of source reduction and reuse targets within EPR. Within EPA's waste management hierarchy, the least preferred option for managing waste at its end of life is disposal, moving to energy recovery, recycling, at the top, source reduction and reuse. And when EPR for packaging was introduced in its early stages, EPR shifts the responsibility of waste management financing from governments to producers, but traditionally and early on, it just kind of moved from disposal to get more recycling and composting. But what we've seen in the US in recent EPR legislation is a push to kind of move waste management up the waste hierarchy to include source reduction and reuse targets. So it's this positive trend within EPR in the US to help governments, municipalities, organizations overall move waste management up that waste hierarchy to include more source reduction and reuse. So what is source reduction? As mentioned, EPR being a framework for shifting responsibility of managing packaging at its end of life, and source reduction in the contents of packaging EPR means reducing the mass of packaging placed on the market. So in general, there are 2 kind of buckets of ways to reduce packaging. One being more system level design changes in terms of reuse and refill. So if packaging is reused multiple times, then less overall raw materials per unit of product is lowered. And then there's also packaging design options. So still having single-use packaging, but optimizing that design to reduce the overall mass of the packaging used. So as mentioned, there are multiple strategies within some of the more packaging design changes. There are options like lightweighting, which reduces the weight or thickness of a package, right sizing, so optimizing the dimensions of a package and proportions, so maybe lowering the amount of headspace, so have a more optimized packaging for the product you're selling. Concentration, which may be, reducing, concentrating the product so less packaging is needed to deliver that same product. Might be large format packaging, so increasing the amount of product sold, therefore lowering the amount of packaging needed per unit of product. And then elimination, eliminating unnecessary components. In this case, example on the right, a pasta box eliminating, a plastic window, which is not necessary for delivery of the product. There are other types of strategies that may be related to certain states, especially California. In this example, material substitution, since California is related only to plastic for its source reduction, moving from a plastic to a non-plastic material would be an option to reduce plastic use, and then also the use of recycled content, which lowers the amount of virgin plastic use, could contribute to source reduction targets. And then, as mentioned, there are other options that require greater changes throughout the entire supply chain. So, would need more holistic system level changes, including, refillable packaging. So when we think about refill, this is consumer owned packaging where they can go to a store or another place and get that packaging refilled with a product. They use it at home and then, wash and manage that packaging themselves and reuse it. While a system managed system, we can call it reuse or pre-fill, a third party or producer would own the packaging. So you would buy the packaging with the product at a store, use it, and then return that product either from home or on the go back at the store. And then the third party or producer would clean and recondition that packaging, refill it, and then set it out for sale again. So California's approach to source reduction is unique amongst the different states. As mentioned, there are 7 states that have passed EPR for packaging, and several others who have considered it in previous sessions. Likely this map requires a few other states that have, considered EPR, as, there's always a new state that's putting it into session. One of the unique parts about California is it's the only state which has the source reduction requirements set in the legislation. So the legislation has requirements, legislative targets for the PRO and producers to meet. Other states like Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, and Washington, targets are set within a PRO or a state plan. So the targets come after the legislation is passed. Most states have, the ability to incentivize reuse or refill. So the legislation or PRO plan has set out that, eco-modulation or fee adjustment should support source reduction, less material use or reuse. Several states have a definition for source reduction, and then also there are differences between states whether source reduction is related only to plastic, like California and Washington, or like other states, source reduction is related to all materials, so not just plastics. Again, so some unique aspects for California. The targets are required in legislation. California is quite unique in its source reduction that it's required for plastic by weight and number of components. So not only do producers in the PRO have to reduce the total mass of plastic they place on the market, but the number of plastic components as well. And California, quite unique, which we'll talk about in more detail later, is the need to submit a individual source reduction plan. So it's not just an overall PRO responsibility, but each producer will need to submit a plan. So we have one more poll that'll come up in the chat as well. And now I will be talking a bit about our learnings from the California Source Reduction Needs Assessment. So as mentioned by Sarah, our team was the lead contractor on the Source Reduction Needs Assessment, which several states have needs assessments for different their EPR programs, but California was unique in that they had a specific needs assessment for their source reduction requirements. So we looked at both the current state and what is happening now, and then also the needed state. So what actions and investments are required for these statutory targets to be met. So we worked closely with Cal Recycle on this, and then also our study partners, Perpetual, Interethnica, and Touch Design. We all worked together on this big study. So California has very ambitious targets within its within SB54. You can see on the left that there's both overall targets by 2032 to hit 25% with interim targets in 2027 and 2030. And there are specific reuse and refill requirements within the legislation as well, up to 10% by 2032. And 8% of the source reduction target can be met through alternative compliance, which in this case refers to the use of recycled content. So one important part to point out is that these requirements are measured against a 2023 baseline. So how much plastic was placed on the market in 2023, and there's no adjustment or allowance for economic growth or population growth. So in 2032, it's required to have 25% less plastic than was placed on the market in 2023. So our objective of the study was to determine the actions and investments needed to achieve the source reduction goals outlined in SB54 for both weight and number of components. So one of the first things we did as part of the study was to evaluate the current use of reuse and refill to reduce plastic. We found 850 instances of refillable packaging and food serviceware and 140 instances of reusable packaging and food serviceware. Most of these were found in, more urban areas, higher income areas. And within the study, we've done, a big GIS analysis showing that. So it's a lot more interesting information within the study as well. And we also had a large consumer and resident engagement as part of this study. So we went to farmers markets, we did a lot of focus groups and talked to consumers about, which of these strategies they were more willing to engage with to reduce the amount of plastic placed on the market. Things like family size items or concentrates found much more easier. They were already doing it, while reusable, refillable containers were still, found to be easy by some consumers, but more consumers found them challenging. So this fed into our study. And when we looked at how you can achieve the source reduction requirements, what impact they might have on consumers and how accessible they are to consumers. So we also evaluated the current packaging placed on the market based on the 2023 baseline assessment. So what was interesting is, based on where packaging is, influences how you may reduce the amount of package. What type of packaging will you reduce? So food serviceware makes up a small share of covered materials by weight, only about 20%, but it makes up about 40% of the components. So food serviceware is quite interesting that if you really use that as a way to source reduce, you'll reduce a lot of components, but maybe less so in weights. There's a lot of lightweight items, forks, spoons, plastic cups, that there's a lot of them, but not a lot of weight. Business to business packaging is the inverse of that. There's a lot of larger, heavier items, so it's a lot of weight, but less components. So again, if you target this type of packaging, you might reduce a lot of weight, but not a lot of components. And again, California has a 25% reduction for weight and number of components, so you need to hit both of those together. Business to consumer packaging kind of has a similar share of weight and number of components. So these variances show that if you're looking at a systems level, you probably have to target several different types of packaging through different strategies to overall meet the target. So we looked at reuse and refill suitability for the different strategies separately from the other source reduction requirements. So we found that two strategies are most suitable for reuse and refill. The first being reusable food serviceware in closed loop settings. So that's like on-site dining, restaurants, stadiums, cafeterias. This would be one of the strategies that is most suitable or most likely to help achieve the overall source reduction target. We found that these solutions are found in California today. They have the capacity to scale. They can contribute to significant component level reduction, and they require limited consumer change. Our engagement with consumers found that they're likely to accept them. There's not many differences with how they engage with packaging on site at stadiums. It doesn't differ that much from single-use packaging. The second strategy being business to business prefill. So this are solutions in the inverse of food serviceware. They can contribute to weight reduction requirements. We found that they can operationally scale in the medium term, so perhaps not the 2027 target coming up soon, but the 2030 and 2032 targets will help contribute to those source reduction requirements. And again, they minimize consumer impact. These happen from the business side, business to business, so there's not the need for significant consumer change or incentives or consumer return infrastructure, but they help create the foundational infrastructure required for consumer-facing reuse in the long term. So if these are all implemented on the business-to-business side, there'll be that washing infrastructure, the logistics required that then after 2032 to focus potentially on more consumer-facing reuse and refill. We also looked at the other source reduction suitability. So this is the additional 15% of source reduction by 2032. The two kind of most suitable options being material substitution and elimination. So these offer one-to-one reduction for weight and components. So if you eliminate a component, you're both reducing the weight and reducing components. A lot of non-plastic materials are available for many food serviceware and packaging formats. We know that there are, bamboo forks, for example, for food serviceware, and then also glass or aluminum packaging types for, plastic packaging. And so the elimination of some, unnecessary components in food serviceware is likely to have less consumer impact. While there are other strategies like lightweighting, right sizing, alternative compliance, these can help contribute towards the weight goals and will likely be used by many producers and have impact. Since they don't reduce components, their overall potential is limited. If you do a lot of lightweighting to reduce weight, for example, you then have not contributed to your component reduction and are likely still going to have to do something to reduce components, and those component reductions will likely end up leading to weight reduction anyway. So it's better to focus on the strategies like material substitution and elimination that contribute to both weight and elimination. So when we take all of these together, we did a big assessment. We looked at 40 different product types, 25 different packaging format types, and evaluated each of them on a set of criteria. We found that there were some strategies that were more suitable than others, as described on the previous slides, and then built them together to what we described as pathways towards the source reduction. These are illustrative in that they are a way to meet the target overall. And then in the report, there's more details on the action and investments. It's likely that an individual producer may have, a different set of circumstances for their own individual source reduction needs. So these are kind of system level approaches to how you would meet the target. This first graph shows how each of these strategies described on the previous slide would overall come together to meet the weight requirement. On the bottom, you see in blue, there are the two reuse and refill strategies, pre-fill business to business and closed loop food serviceware. And then the above that, elimination, material substitution being a large contributor to the overall reduction, and then lightweighting and alternative compliance at the top. This next graph shows how those same strategies contribute to the component source reduction. So we see because closed loop or because food serviceware has so many more components, those same actions lead to a greater share of component level reduction compared to business pre-fill. So it's again illustrating this balance between the component and the weight reduction. And again, because alternative compliance and lightweighting do not reduce components, they do not contribute to the component level reduction. So in practice, what could that look like, in a system for packaging delivery? To meet those 2032, 25% source reduction targets, what is described in these graphs could be achieved through about 50% of on-site dining. So again, that's restaurants, stadiums, event spaces, cafeterias, who currently supply single-use plastic food serviceware to reusable. About 10% of business-to-business sales would shift to reusable packaging. About 20% of plastic food serviceware would be eliminated. So, for example, takeout orders no longer providing plastic cutlery. About 10 to 20% shift to non-plastic material. So this would be about 10% of packaging moving to glass or aluminum and other packaging types, paper, and 20% of food serviceware moving to non-plastic. There'd be a small amount of lightweighting through, different packaging formats, and an integration of recycled content across different packaging and food serviceware at various levels, which are described more in the report as well. So as mentioned, there's a lot of detail within the report. We talk about the specific actions, how many washing facilities are required to make this happen, what is the investment requirement, the capital expenses, the operating expenses. So what does that mean for you and your individual business? As mentioned, California is unique that there's a requirement for an individual source reduction plan. So each individual producer will need to submit to CAA, the PRO, an individual source reduction plan. So within those plans, a requirement to show what you have source reduced since 2013 by weight and components. A lot of producers have already done a lot of plastic source reduction. So there's an opportunity to share what you've done since 2013. And then also how much you will plan to source reduced by the milestone years 2027, 2030, and 2032. You'll need to describe how you will meet that source reduction through different strategies and pathways. So how much can be reduced through reuse and refill, how much reduced through elimination, material substitution, alternative compliance, concentration, right sizing, lightweighting, large format. So there's both quantitative requirements in that you'll have to calculate how much will be reduced, but there'll also be opportunities for free-form answers to explain how you will achieve that. So the important date coming up here is that they'll are due this summer, still to be finalized, but likely in July or August. So it's important to start working on them now. So what does that mean for you navigating this source reduction requirement? So again, these are due over the summer. It's an opportunity to conduct a portfolio level analysis to identify how you can achieve these source reduction requirements, and really work with your team to develop kind of data-driven source reduction strategy that minimizes your compliance risks and maximizes your cost optimization. So there are risks of, not getting this right. If you identify kind of the wrong areas, you may invest incorrectly. When more analysis will identify kind of the correct opportunities for your source reduction. It's important that CAA has accurate information from their members and how different members are expected to achieve their source reduction requirements. So they're going to aggregate all of this information, and having kind of credible data from their members will help with their investment and long-term source reduction strategy. CAA has the ability to modulate fees, and they're looking at several options to influence fees or adjust fees to support source reduction. So, getting this right will limit your fee exposure. And then these are, short-term goals, really. It's 2027 coming up in months, 2030 and 2032. So really, the sooner you start thinking about this, the greater chance there is at success. So we believe at Eunomia that we can be a valuable strategic partner for you on your source reduction requirements and supporting your individual source reduction plan. We've worked, as mentioned, on the source reduction needs assessment. We also worked on the collection, processing, and market needs assessment. So we have kind of the unique system level experience, but then also our expertise in individual producer packaging will allow us to kind of balance our system level understanding with your individual and specific packaging needs. And we are independent and data-driven analysts that'll help support you as well. So, it's important to take action now. As we know, the deadline is coming up. This is a statutory requirement. Unlike other states, it's not in a plan or, can be easily adjusted. This is in the legislation, so it is a requirement. And, packaging redesign takes time, so it's important to start now. So we can do a lot for your individual plan. We believe that we can help you through our, data experience. We've worked with a lot of producers before, looking at what you've reduced since 2013, but then also working strategically with you on what you can achieve by 2027, 2030, and 2032, and looking at the different strategies to that reduction. And then also we think we can provide, good support in your free form answers, looking at why what you've put is achievable and the evidence behind that. Also looking at, comparisons to best-in-class packaging, and looking and potentially where maybe source reduction is less feasible. If your packaging is already at best-in-class, providing evidence to show that it's less feasible for your packaging to reduce, and then also evidencing what support maybe you and other producers will need from the PRO to enable the source reduction. So it's an opportunity for all producers to kind of have something that CAA will see and, work together on their systems level plan. So thank you again for joining us. My email's here. If anyone wants to schedule a time, you can sign up for our newsletter, and then also our previous Fit for the Future webinar on Oregon's LCA part of their EPR bill. And now we will take some questions. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. A huge amount of information in there, obviously. Just so everyone knows, you will have access to the presentation and the webinar after the event. But in terms of some of the questions, there's a lot of great questions in the chat. I think a kind of common question we've been asked a little bit is around the component. What is a component, I suppose, in the context of SB54 and plastic? So, for instance, one question was very much around if I change from plastics to a paper component, it's still a component, right? But is it a component, I suppose, in SB54?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would encourage everyone. CalRecycle has put out guidance on what counts as a component. So I would say first go to that. They'll have the most detailed and relevant information, but there is detail on what is a separable component, whether it makes up something separable. So there is quite a bit in there. I encourage everyone the most relative information will be from CalRecycle, but if you're moving to a non-plastic material, it would not count as a plastic component and therefore would count towards reduction as long as it's still recyclable, which is an important part under CalRecycle SB54.
Yeah, amazing. There was a question in chat just to clarify if you could give an example maybe of business to business pre-fill. I think this is quite an interesting question and was a key part of our analysis as we delved in, correct?
Yeah, so it could be, providing back of house packaging and material for restaurants, for example, or between businesses providing products to them. So wouldn't be consumer facing, but would just be the interaction of products between two businesses. And Sarah, feel free to add additional examples if.
Yeah, I think when we did the work and working with Perpetual, we found that there is a large amount of product that's going from a manufacturer producer into areas like restaurants or stadiums or large users, I suppose, of food, and there was an opportunity to switch those with less obstacles because you're dealing with a fewer number of kind of stakeholders or partners to enable that change to take place. So that was a key part of the analysis. I don't know if this might be a bit too tricky, but I'll ask you anyway, Michael. You can always say I can't think now, but do we have any examples of material substitution which contribute to both the kind of component and the weight-based piece?
Yeah, I mean, if you had like an olive oil container that was in plastic with a plastic cap and maybe a plastic handle, that would have several different plastic components. And if that shifted to a glass container, maybe with a metal aluminum cap with no plastic, so it would have much less plastic weight, no plastic. And if it's all non-plastic, then it would have no plastic components either. So there are some opportunities there. And then one thing that we didn't mention, but in California, there's already a deposit system for beverage containers. So all of this has to happen with, only covered materials are non-beverage. So when we think about, material substitution, some examples usually are in beverage containers moving from, maybe a plastic to an aluminum, but beverage containers are not included under SB54. So it has to come from all other types of packaging.
Okay. There's a lot of questions. I'm just trying to. This one I think is interesting. So, does each producer need to build a plan for 25% individually, or will producers get different targets based on industry? And obviously, again, as Michael said, CAA is the best person to answer this, but we can just kind of give you some insights as to where we are, where we think we are now.
Yeah, as far as I understand, there's still needs to be more guidance on that from CAA, and I think they'll be providing more guidance soon on the individual plans. So that's going to come from them. But I think either way, it's an important opportunity to kind of show what you think is possible within your business to kind of have CAA be able to see that. I don't know if you have anything there to add as well, Sarah.
No, that sounds great. I mean, there's a few questions around if we're switching or if someone's switching, do they have to show the environmental outcome from that switch? So if they are moving from plastic to an alternative material, do they have to show any environmental outcomes as a result of that shift?
Yeah, there are some definitions of reuse within the regulations that are still in draft that'll hopefully, show that if you meet the requirement of what is reusable, it would be environmentally beneficial, but there's no requirement for your switch to have less CO2 emissions or anything. It's a plastic source reduction target, so the main focus is reducing the amount of plastic. So that was kind of the guiding North Star for our study, was what is suitable to reduce plastic use.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to know. Obviously, when we carried out the needs assessment, it was almost, it's a point in time assessment to some extent, and so much when we started the process maybe eight or so months ago, lots of things have changed in terms of the regulations as well, but we were working on the basis of like the original the first regs that went out and what was in our scope of work. So things have changed and moved on, and that's why it's super critical to keep an eye obviously on both CalRecycle and CEA's website and guidance that they provide. A question here, if we move to compostable plastics, is that allowed?
If it meets, if it meets the definition of plastic, it would still be counted as a plastic material. So, yeah, I think it is allowed, but moving to that wouldn't be a source reduction method.
Okay. Let me see what else we've got. I'm quite surprised that no one's actually mentioned cost. So I maybe just say, as I said, the report does give a lot of insight into what this could cost, in the future. Obviously, the needs assessment is a tool that the pro can then use. Obviously, it's been doing its own work in the background as well, but can then use to inform what might flow through into the program plan. But yeah, can you give us an indication, I suppose, of any of the potential costs that this might come, might come through?
Yeah, so I think what we described in the kind of pathway example is about, from now until 2032, about $8 billion in cumulative costs. So that comes from, I think, like 1 to 2 billion in capital expenditure. So investments in washing infrastructure, which, creates locally based jobs in California. So that's for the washing of some of the reusable packaging, and then also about 6 billion for operating expenses. So, this is the R&D costs of different packaging design changes, and then also the ongoing costs of the reuse system, so the collection and washing of the different materials. So we have broken out in the study, which cost is related to what strategy. So how much cost is for the reusable food serviceware versus the pre-fill business to business versus the lightweighting, and then show kind of what infrastructure is also required for each of those changes as well. So although this is a system level analysis, it does help provide guidance to kind of show on an individual level what might be required or what background infrastructure your business might need to implement some of these strategies as well.
Good. A couple of questions on how, first of all, how can companies gauge what level of source reduction is sufficient, given some of the sector kind of unique challenges? And I suppose, I think this is part of the kind of need for the value, I suppose, of the source reduction, individual source reduction plans, in that, the purpose of those to some extent is to give the pro an indication of what might be possible and within your organization and maybe across different sectors. There will be challenges for different applications. And as Michael said, in the work that we did, we went into a lot of detail with our partner, Touch Design, thinking about, the role that the packaging provides in protecting a good and making sure that it arrives on the shelves, as the producer wants it to be, and it lands on our plate as we want to eat it, for instance. But so there is different challenges, but the role and the need to get the source reduction, individual source reduction, really highlighting what you can achieve, what are the challenges, what are the timescales that you might have to come against to make some of these changes, is really important for feeding that information back into the probe, to understanding what this might look like in terms of sort of targets across sectors as well as for individuals. Michael, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I think that was a great answer.
Thank you. I think there's a question here and on the de minimis, and I think there's been a lot of discussion on this, and maybe some of that has moved on since we kind of did the original work. But is the aligning in a polycoated package considered a component, first of all? I think you can probably answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, if there's plastic, it'll count towards a component.
Is it a component?
Yeah.
And then does it qualify for the de minimis exemption?
As I was on vacation the last 2 weeks, so maybe it happened in the last 2 weeks, but the details on the de minimis exemption still not been released, as I understand. So more details still need to come with that. I think I encourage everyone to watch Circular Action Alliance's webinar that they gave 2 or 3 weeks ago now, where they go into a bit more of the details on the de minimis exemption. So that's still something that I think, again, best from CalRecycle and CAA to come on there, what will be under that exemption.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of information coming through and a lot to navigate for producers and and their partners in the value chain as well. I think we've only got a couple of minutes, but I think the one thing it would be great to highlight, I think, just at the end. So this webinar, we have focused on SB54, and as Michael said, that it does focus on plastic source reduction. Other states are not taking such a kind of material specific approach, and so there is in other states a requirement for overall source reduction, I suppose, and there obviously some of the changes that can be made, like the substitution, will not come into play, because there wouldn't be a benefit necessarily of moving from a plastic bottle to a glass bottle in some cases, unless you had a specific plastic reduction target. An overall source reduction target, you may take a different strategy. So I think what wasn't highlighted here really is the kind of still, as we see, a patchwork of how source reduction is being required through the different EPR legislations. But I think you've been a great audience. We've had some great questions. I want to obviously thank Michael for presenting today, and if you have any other questions, please either put them in the chat or do reach out directly. You'll receive the presentation and a thank you after the webinar, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.